Okay. So after a couple of slides with videos, I guess I'm more responsible for the boring part of this presentation. Regretfully, I see this. Yeah, after we saw some historic aspects of voice interaction and voice assistance, I would like to point out some current challenges. So some aspects that we have to care about maybe as well in this week to develop some good voice assistant skills. Well, Germans love standards. So it's no wonder I'm starting with a standardized process for how to develop user interfaces in general. So not only voice user interfaces, but as well graphical user interfaces. Well, that's the user-centered design process in this ISO norm pointed out there, which is an iterative process that comprises 4 basic steps that those challenges I reveal can be matched to. So first of all, we need to get aware of the context that the voice assistant skill, or voice assistant in general, has to live afterwards and have to be used. So we get to know who is going to be using the assistant, or the user interface that we are designing. In the next step, we have to find out the requirements that our system has to fulfill. Well, so we get to know the users into more detail here. In the third step, in the third phase, we're in the design and implementation phase, so we have to create something. So the design, the user interface, maybe at first a prototype that we're going to, in a fourth step, evaluate. So we have to see if our requirements are matched, and we have to find out it using specific evaluation techniques and methods that we have to choose from a variety of. And if the evaluation process is not fulfilled in a way that all requirements are met, then we have to start again in this process. So as I've told you, it's an iterative process. So keep in mind these 4 steps. Next off is that there are several challenges that we have to face and we have to work on in this week. So the images, the pictures here are more random, but you'll recognize these challenges later on in this presentation. So first, for voice interaction itself, or voice assistance in special, it's important to have a convincing human-like voice. Yeah? You want to communicate with this voice assistant in a very natural way. So you want to say something like a human because you are one, and you expect the voice assistant to respond as well very human-like. Secondly, there's a huge concern in privacy. So there are a lot of legal aspects playing a role here. So yeah, you have to be aware of what the system, the voice assistant, is able to listen to, what is allowed to listen to, and what is as well allowed to talk about in an audience, in front of an audience. Third step, the dialogue guidance. So we, as the designers, have to be aware of how people interact with a voice assistant and have to model the dialogues, the conversation aspect of this voice assistant in a way that is satisfying. Fourth, the speaker recognition. It's pretty crucial that when we want to design a system that meets the needs of the user, that the system is able to distinguish multiple users in this voice assistant. So the speaker recognition is an aspect here. And fifth aspect, the evaluation. So we need proper methods, proved methods to say, okay, this skill, that system that we developed, this user interface is a good one, is a usable one. And especially in the area of healthcare, it is important to put a bit of emphasis of specific challenges here. So the privacy and legal aspects part is emphasized in the area of healthcare, of course, because there you often handle and deal with sensitive data according to your personal health. Then the domain awareness and language variants plays a big role here, because you have multiple people, multiple users of a system of different domains. So you're interacting with patients, with elderly, with nurse, with caregivers, with doctors, and you have to distinguish all those people, and as well be able to interact with the patients of different, for instance, cultures. So cultures can make up a new domain as well here. And again, evaluation, because in the area of healthcare there are some specific requirements according to the evaluation of those voice assistants as well. And now back to this user-centered design circle. I've told you we need this as a standard to work on. So so you can put all those challenges to match at least one of those phases during the user-centered design. So of course, the way of how to develop a dialogue, so the dialogue guidance aspect is matched to the design part, or the evaluation part, of course, is matched to the evaluation. Well, let's start by taking a look at how to model a convincing human-like voice. And that means as well to find a way not only to sound human-like, but as well to understand natural language. So be aware of the uncanny valley here at first. So normally, you would expect that if you have a system that is increasingly perceived as very human, that looks very human, is as well perceived very familiar, and it's perceived very familiar. But there's a problem that you can see here in this. I'll try to in this over right here. So that there is a certain point where you say the system is almost but not quite human, and it's not able to react in a way that you would expect from that system. It's not able to be very very human-like, or human-like enough for that kind of appearance of the system. And then that seems to be quite a creepy system. And that's the uncanny valley here. So what we need is not only a system that is able to sound very human-like, but is as well able to answer in a very human-like way. So the first aspect, to sound very human-like, there are some things going on here. So the normal way of speech synthesis that we use in most systems today is the concatenative speech synthesis. It's based on the on building up a sequence of sound samples together to sound pretty human-like. The former variant of speech synthesis is the parametric one that I'll not talk about here now, but Google developed a pretty new method based on machine learning and building up new waveforms from scratch, based on a neural network that as well respects the human-like emphasis and inflection of parts of your speech. And just want to show you how that could sound. So I'll start with the parametric one, so the oldest way of speech synthesis.
The Blue Lagoon is a 1980 American romance and adventure film directed by Randall Kleiser.
Well, you pretty much understand what it's telling you, but it sounds pretty robotic. An improvement in the direction of concatenative speech synthesis sounds, or could sound, like this from Google.
The Blue Lagoon is a 1980 American romance and adventure film directed by Randall Kleiser.
And it sounds very, very more human-like. But the WaveNet system based on neural networks and machine learning from Google rather sounds like this.
The Blue Lagoon is a 1980 American romance and adventure film directed by Randall Kleiser.
So just to show you how speech synthesis improves, and that really sounds pretty human-like. And then of a system that speaks that way, you would expect to react as well with answers that are as intelligent and smart as this sounds. And therefore, can I go? And therefore, you need some advanced AI. And one system that goes at least in the right direction comes from IBM. So IBM Watson, hopefully you know that, offers a service in the direction of more customer service, the area of customer service. So it's the IBM Watson Assistant that is able to pretty smartly distinguish what the user says or what the user gives into the system as input, and decides whether it's going to be a conversation, so we need to trigger our dialogue skill, or if the user really needs an information right now, so we will go over to the search skill. And according to the dialogue skill, most systems only are able, like Alexa, are only able to identify intents. So the user asks a question, and the system tries to identify the intent or the intention of the user, and then processes it and gives an answer with hopefully the right information. But what's new in IBM Watson Assistant is that it's as well able to work with or to deal with digressions. So with the switch of topics in between a conversation or one dialogue, or with disambiguation, so meaning that some information is missing, there's some kind of uncertainty in what's been said, and the system is able to answer to the input or ask the right questions to get further input for the right decision to make here. Okay, but I want to include within this talk as well the teasers to the very quite interesting talks during this week, and one of these here to mention is the one from tomorrow morning 9 a.m. from Amanda Curry from Scotland, as she took part in the Alexa Skill Challenge last year and was in the finalist, was part of the finalists groups there. And a second one as well, Jan Pichel, as well part of the finalists of the last year's Alexa Skill Challenge, coming from the team of Prague. So, and this talk is on Tuesday, 9 a.m. So they dealt with the question of how to make Alexa more human-like, basically. Next up, privacy, or the legal aspects that are pretty important when talking about voice assistants, is because you have to always be able to decide what a speech system or what someone else is allowed to hear or allowed to know about you. And according to privacy, in general, it means that it's the right of everyone to keep their personal matters and relationships secret. But according to voice assistants, there are 4 perspectives that you have to distinguish. First, you have 2 aspects, or 2 perspectives, dealing with the question of what is a voice assistant allowed to hear? When is it allowed to listen to you? And of course, as well, what is allowed to do with those information when it listened to us, so what to do with the recordings. And on the other hand, as well, 2 perspectives related to the output of a voice assistant. So meaning what a voice assistant is allowed to give you information in the output. And then you have to distinguish those 2 groups in the relation between the voice assistant and the active user, and the voice assistant and its surrounding, its environment. So according to the active user in the input, you have to say that you as a user have to be able to decide when a voice assistant is allowed to listen to you, and you have to actively decide what the system can do with the information, with the recordings of you. But according to the environment or the passive users, they are they are as well affected because the people around you are mostly not aware of this existence of a voice assistant in a room, and that's something very tricky on. And I hope we'll find a solution for that problem during this week, but we'll see. And according to the output, it's important to it's the perspective of what the system is allowed to give you as a user an information, and of course what kind of information the voice assistant is allowed to put into a response in front of a specific audience, so the passive users and the environment. So these are 4 perspectives to be aware of when talking about privacy according to voice assistants. So this might lead to several questions, and I just want to point out the 3rd one there. So that imagine you're inviting guests to your house, you have a voice assistant in your home, and from where do the guests know that you have a voice assistant present in your home? Is it possible for a guest to decide whether the voice assistant is allowed to record what you as a guest are saying or talking, and what not? And yeah, what is the consequence? Yeah? Is the consequence that you say, okay, I will shut off the voice assistant, or do you say, oh, guest, you have to go, sorry? But first of all, from where can he know that you have a voice assistant in your home? Well, it's not exactly the correct teaser here, but some very interesting inputs on the legal aspects according to voice assistants will be given on Tuesday before lunch by Anna Lauber-Rölsberg. The dialogue guidance challenge in this field. And again, there's some standardized stuff. So when would you say that a dialogue, a voice interaction dialogue, is considered good? When is it good? And there are some criteria related to good user interfaces in general, but according to voice assistants, I would point out the 4 highlighted in purple here, that it should be possible for a user to understand how a system can be used. So the conformity with user expectations and the self-descriptiveness here are the 2 aspects that are crucial, if you ask me, because there's usually no manual lying next to the voice assistant telling you, okay, here, these are the utterances, the phrases that you are allowed to talk, that you are allowed to say in front of this voice assistant, and then he'll work just fine. And if you tell him anything else, it'll break, whatever. So the system has to help you out. You have to ask anything, and you have to be able to ask anything, and the system should help you with it and say, okay, sorry, that's something I don't understand, but what you could ask me is something like the weather, for example, or whatever. As well important is the controllability, because when a voice assistant starts talking, like you've seen it in the last video here from Alan, then you should be able to stop it. Yeah? You should be able to stop the system from talking and asking something else. That should be possible as well. And according to the healthcare focus of the summer school and the different user types using this system, so patients, caregivers, doctors, etc. It's important to have the system be adaptive to the user's domain. Say this way. So the system, the user interface, should be customizable. So the individualization aspect is important. And some more information on dialogue guidance will be given on Wednesday morning during the talk of Benjamin Cohen from Dublin. Speaker recognition. So the speaker recognition can be seen from 3 different perspectives. So first of all, speaker recognition in general is the identification of a person speaking using the characteristics of his voice. Okay, and it can be used to find out who is speaking, to be able to distinguish multiple people, to offer the individualization aspect in here. But it could be taken a step further. So according to the privacy aspect, it could be necessary to not just recognize a user, but to identify a user to 100%, so to authenticate a user. So use the speaker recognition as a kind of gatekeeper to access a specific system that can be used by a voice. And the level of speaker recognition is the speaker diarization. So just to differentiate, distinguish between multiple voices. So if person A is speaking and then person B starts speaking, the system recognizes it. Yeah, and if person A afterwards continues speaking, the system as well recognizes it not as person C, but as well again as person A. Probably when you have an own voice assistant and an own Alexa at home, you probably place it next to the TV set, and so that's a problem, an issue that I face quite often. So when the TV set is running and somebody's talking there, and I ask something to Alexa, it doesn't stop listening because there's talking as well someone else on the TV. And then the information Alexa gives is rubbish. Okay, an input in this direction, among other things, will be given by Peter Birkholz and Sven Engesser on Thursday morning. I have to hurry up, I guess. So just take a sneak peek into the domain awareness and language variancy. So there are just a couple of questions that you might ask when creating a system that is domain aware and has a certain kind of language variance. So most importantly is the question of how to make a system adapt to the user's characteristics. So for example as well, the cultural differences that play an important role here in this field to offer a kind of language variance here. And we'll talk about this further on Friday morning with Dagmar Grohmann from the University of Vienna in Austria. And last but not least, the task of evaluation. So how do we get to know if a system or a voice assistant is considered usable? And therefore, again, we need a certain kind of standard. So we need to know what usability really means. And it's basically the 3 aspects of effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. So the question if a system is able to fulfill the tasks given to him, the ability of a system to fulfill tasks with a reasonable amount of effort, so in a reasonable amount of time, or a reasonable amount of cognitive effort as well. And a system has to satisfy the user. So the user has to accept that there is a system that he wants to use, and it does not lead to too much frustration. So we have to answer these 3 questions, and pretty helpful for this to ensure that we are able to answer those questions is to apply a certain method in how to design those voice assistants, those user interfaces. And I pointed out already the process of user-centered design as an iterative process with the 4 steps mentioned earlier. And of course as well, a proper development strategy in general. So like the Google Design Sprint process, so a very agile development procedure that can be combined as well with the user-centered design here, what we are trying to do during the summer school in 1 iteration this week. But that doesn't answer our question of is it usable now? So we have to clarify that applying proper methods, proper techniques. So the easiest would be to just ask the user or the users if they like the system. If they were able to do everything, every task they are given to, if they are able to do this in a reasonable amount of time, and if they are frustrated or if they like it. But there are, of course, as well, not just certain kind of questionnaires, open questionnaires there, but as well standardized questionnaires that can be used here as a proper evaluation method, an approved evaluation method. Or you use a kind of thinking aloud method. So usually used for, saying, graphical user interfaces or other user interfaces than voice user interfaces, because there you get a task to fulfill, and while you are fulfilling this task, you have to verbalize your thoughts. Yeah, if you don't find anything. If you are frustrated, and as well if you found something, and you should articulate this as well. This leads to a problem according to voice assistants, because when it's the main task to talk to a system, and you as well should verbalize your thoughts, that might interfere. So you have to find a solution for this here. Or you say, okay, no, I don't like people. And I would rather do an evaluation without any people and do it based on heuristics, using guidelines, if there are any, that can be applied here. So what I make you aware of is that you can decide which evaluation method to use to get information about if the system is effective, so if the task that the system is intended for can be fulfilled, if the task can be fulfilled in an efficient way, and if the system does not frustrate too much, or if they like it, maybe. And more about this, we're going to be on Saturday morning, 9 a.m. as well, by Gerhard Weber, about the evaluation aspect with a focus on voice interaction. So yeah, that's it. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Just a question about the difference between effectiveness and efficiency. According to the voice assistants, how we consider them here, like for the voice assistants or vocal interfaces?
Well, on the one hand, it's a question if the system is able to do the things that you expect them to. Yeah, an efficient system is not usable at all if the answer the system gives are wrong, right? So the effectiveness is just if the answer that you got, the response that you got, is the right one or a helpful one, and the efficiency here is maybe how long did it take, or as well how difficult it has been to find out what to say to the voice assistant, to get a certain information. So, yeah.
Is it somehow related to the synthesis that we mentioned, like how human-like it would be, or we cannot consider it to that like efficiency?
I guess you can understand the parametric speech synthesis as well as the concatenative and the WaveNet, the neural network-based one, pretty well. So the aspect of the understandability of a voice assistant is, I guess, not that a problem in this case here. But when the system answers and the response is too long, well, then this adds to the time it takes until you get the information you really need, right? So I guess in this aspect, this is important here.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I guess this is maybe more of a provocation than a question. I know we mentioned, I guess, one of the key things to think about when designing conversational interfaces is this idea of naturalness. And I just attended last month the Conversational User Interface Conference in Dublin, and there was a number of papers there that were talking, really challenging this thought and saying, well, you know, should we really be trying to make Siri or Alexa or these skills that we're making for Alexa natural, or is that perhaps doing a disservice to the community? Because when you make these assistants sound human and feel human, then people associate things that may not be appropriate for conversational interfaces. They may think that it can do certain things that you might think your pal might be able to do, and obviously won't be able to do. So.
What's your question there?
So it's not really a question. I guess it's more like just like a provocation about maybe maybe I guess if we're to make it a question, I'd say is it always helpful to assume that we should be making assistants, conversational assistants that are helpful, or that that are human sounding, or are there times, or are there situations, maybe depending on the design need, where it might make sense to maybe even make it sound robotic?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I mainly work with a small robot from Segway Robotics, so Lumo Segway Robotics, Lumo robot, and it as well has some kind of speech synthesis, but it's on purpose very robotic, and you barely understand it. That's a problem there for itself, but you would never expect it to be able to do things that it's not possible, that it's not able to do. And yeah, well, you can do this another way, of course. That's what I want to point out. So that you wanted on purpose that a system does not sound quite natural. But the direction, I guess, is the other hand. So Siri is with each version and iteration sounding more natural. Alexa as well. So the English. The English version of Alexa is sounding quite more natural than the German one, for example. And as well, according to the Google WaveNet system there, it was interesting to see the graphic that I've shown you of the, I can try to go back there, maybe. Has a second half. That's not shown here in this presentation, and it's related to not to US English but to Mandarin. And there it was another kind of naturalness. So there, for example, it was the case that the WaveNet system was better than parametric and concatenative speech synthesis, but not that much. And interestingly, the concatenative speech synthesis was worse than the parametric, so the old speech synthesis here. So it really depends also on the language it's related to sound more natural. But the developments are going in this direction, I would say. That Siri, Alexa, Cortana, whatsoever, should sound quite natural. But the problem here is that the system has to not only sound natural, but as well to do some smart things here that you would expect.
So I have a follow-up questions to what he asked. So is there any reference to healthcare, that what kind of natural voice works for healthcare, and maybe in literature could tell us how the naturalists who come up with?
I'm not sure, but I don't think so. That is too different. Any other opinion to this?
So maybe the kind of information you want to give to the nurse or to the medicine at all, I think is more context-based. So if they're like an emergency and they have to shout on each other, then there's a smart system who are talking to you not the best way. Maybe want in this case more like a metaphoric. Look back to the semantics or semiotics, or like metaphoric ear cans to just have some sounds to induce some system information. So then you don't have all the time maybe like voice interface, but more like a audio interface at all, and it depends on the context, maybe which kind of extraction of the voice you're using, and through inducing different kind of effects for the user at all.
But I would say that's rather an aspect of vocabulary that's used than the human likeness of the system.
But just to add on, if we use the context in India, we have different languages and the different way of the dialect we have different. So when we wanted to make it a human-like, then we need the Alexa to be trained in multiple languages and multiple way of speaking it. Would that be the good way to move forward? And would Alexa fit in if, for example, assuming it in the healthcare system, the patient coming in, the doctor and patient interacting, it might vary a lot. So in terms of diversity in India, this human life is still questionable, but I do not know outside India how it might work.
I guess this refers to the cultural differences as well within the Indian culture, for example, to have certain dialects there or variants of a language that should be respected. So at least the system has to be able to understand the language of the user, of course. Well, if it doesn't, then it's pretty unusable then. And it's the same with several dialects that you have, for example, in German here, especially here in Saxony, and it's pretty weird dialect that people use, but not only here. But, on the other hand, it's not necessary for the voice assistant to as well mirror that dialect then there, because there is one clean German that can be used here, for example, to communicate to people here that everybody understands. But probably for the elderly care environment or area, that could be interesting to make a voice assistant sound more like your grandma or so, or your children or whatsoever. And therefore it could be necessary or at least helpful to make a system that really sounds specifically like a person, or at least like somebody living in that area where the dialect used is spoken.
To my mind, also from an ethical or legal point of view, that is really interesting, and I think it might really depend on the context. Or probably the question is whether you would like to induce some kind of emotional attachment to this to the voice assistant, or if you rather want to prevent some kind of emotional attachment or emotional reaction. Because if you would operate voice assistants in order to induce consumers to buy things, to conclude a contract, it might even be, from a legal point of view, it might even be the question whether one should ban too human-like voice assistants, because in that sense you might exploit our cognitive disposition to actually develop some kind of emotional feelings, and that might be even the unintended effect of that. So I think it's a really interesting question that you raised, which is really one of the really big questions relating to the impact on society, whether we might have to differentiate.
Would be for sure quite interesting to see a selling agent or in a shop that is able to show how sad it is that it's not that it didn't sell anything to you, or to say, okay, I will be pretty happy when you buy this.
Sure. Then you might have the selling agent, which might be an artificial intelligence and a voice assistant system. You might have them calling you every whatever and taking the time, talking to you for 2 hours or even longer. And then I think quite a lot of consumers might feel guilty or feel sorry for them if they did not then enter into the contract, for example. And we have some instruments, some remedies for this phenomenon in the real world, where we might have some right to withdraw from the contract, but I don't know how that would work with artificial intelligence.
And withdrawing from the contract that Amazon records your voice as well.
I would like to draw on your provocation, because I would like to ask a question if we are able to escape the human likeness. Because if you're thinking about talking to an assistant in a language with words that we're using, aren't we entering already human likeness? You know? Do you understand what I mean? I think we have two problems. We have the problem that we are entering the mode of communication, which is totally human, only human, solely human, because animals can talk, plants can talk, and anything else. And the other problem is what we are now talking about, the voice modulation. And so I think we have two problems. We have a kind of human likeness already because of the natural language. We have the other problem of the voice. So just to try it a little bit further provocation.
So adding on to her point, while we are designing, can we also look at the business perspective of it, and then we really think, and then we are in a much more aware state. For example, Alexa wants to expand and diverse its use case, and that's why we are building for different contexts. So if we are aware that there is also a business motive behind building this thing, and there is accessibility part also comes in the picture, but the business also drives the whole the thing.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, I hope so that we'll take a look at it, but I guess we don't have a talk about business models, if I'm not pretty sure. We don't have, right? Yeah. But you're free to propose one. It's a good business model, because it's a miracle what Amazon really wants with the Alexa. Yeah. They don't tell you that. No.
I think it is really what will bring a breakthrough if there would be a model that allows to include third-party companies in order to create let's say, an ecosystem of services around the voice assistant. So in my mind, it's like what we saw when the app stores were developed, that all of a sudden it was possible for third parties to produce software and sell this on that platform. We are missing this still to a large extent from Amazon and Google. They still fight to be the only ones, but I think there will be only one breakthrough when it is possible to have a platform that is independent. And for example, if I would want to sell to Bosch, that's a big German company, a voice assistant, they would probably say no interest. We don't give you our data. Give us a neutral platform. If that is available, then we go into voice assistants. So I think this will be what is needed in the future. We're not yet there. And maybe the competition that is going on will help us. So from that end, the business model in that sense, maybe not yet here. And I've heard there are 728 languages in India, so I think your business model will not prosper very well. So it's a bit of a problem. It's like, for example, we have people from Czech Republic here, 10 million Czech people. So who is making an Alexa for Czech language? I don't know yet. So it would be interesting in the group, if there are in your group people interested talking about the need for development and how a business model can help to overcome current limitations. So from that end, I would imagine that there can be a good discussion in a particular group, but not probably for everyone.
Yeah, it's very common to have voice assistants as well being part of a product and be a reason to buy the product. So imagine cars, yes, that you expect them that are today able to listen to you, hey BMW or hey Mercedes or whatever, and then can interact with the car in a certain way. So it's not a kind of app store behind this, so that it's extendable to a certain point. But it's just a feature and a reason for people maybe to buy a certain product, and as well part of an iPhone to have a Siri. You only get Siri when you buy an Apple product, right? So it would be quite interesting to have it extended to a way that you have a certain open platform here and kind of open market then as well, to be able to develop certain skills that are helpful and to be able to sell them as well and build a business model around this. Yeah.
So just to challenge, I guess, the last point. So I think one thing I'm sort of noticing a lot as well is people like to think of this as sort of just another interaction modality, right? We have voice, we have GUI, we have all these different ways of interacting, and I'm wondering, like, is there something unique about speech and conversational interfaces themselves that maybe we really need to rethink what we have. So like for the last point you mentioned, you know, having app stores. Well, does app stores necessarily make sense, let's say, at a conversational interface where every time I want to interact with Siri, I have to think, oh, do I have this app installed, right? Whereas if I'm conversing with you, I don't have to think, oh, does he have this skill installed? Do I have to go out now and look it up and install it? So maybe in that respect, we need more natural ways of thinking of skills instead of having these sort of very modular and rigid blocks or skills, which is certainly what Alexa and a lot of the companies that are creating these sort of ecosystems are doing.
I guess it's just the metaphor that you know from another area. So like apps from a smartphone that you as well should be able to have apps on a voice interface, and additionally it eases the kind of development or extendability of a platform to have a kind of pool where you put all the extensions in, like apps. The utterance that you're allowed to say with your voice assistant are limited if the apps that are activated are as well limited. So if you would open up this to a infinite set of apps, for example, so when you add a new skill there and it's activated for all users on the world, then the possible amount of utterances that you can say to a voice assistant are as well pretty large, and then the accuracy, the speech recognition accuracy would drop, I guess. Maybe these are reasons, but just guesses. So I guess then, thank you again.